Hi everyone. Just forgive the weird angle, guys. I don't have a really great setup yet, so I'm still working on that, and I'm just heading to the gym, and I just have some thoughts, And right now, I think quite a few people. I'm not sure. I wouldn't say the majority of people, but I would say probably close to half of the nation is following the debates pretty closely. Specifically, what's going on with the Democrats, because, well, for one, I think a lot of people are watching in general just because they're curious. Um, they failed pretty hard last time, and there was a good reason. And everyone, I think, has their different reasoning for it, but the root of it is all the same. Like some people will say, regardless of what it was, I think what it came down to is the Democratic Party messed up last time, pretty bad, like in a pretty major way, in my opinion. So with that in consideration, people I think this year are starting to, at least now that 2020 is coming around, look really closely at the candidates. And it's interesting. It's really interesting because people that paid attention to what happened last election cycle, um, the Bernie Bros, I would say, I think a lot of them have a good clear picture of what happened. The problem is I don't think people have a great memory. I think in general people have a pretty shaky memory, and people emphasize or omit or add, you know, whatever the case may be. People change their minds, change reality from their mind differs from reality. For whatever the reason, people's minds differ from reality, and that's human nature. Why humans are like that, I couldn't really say, but that's the truth. Humans, by nature, have shoddy memories. Some have better memories than others. See, the things I remember about the last debate cycle, and I think this is important. I remember how biased the news, how biased. Adjust this a little bit. See, I remember how biased CNN was, and how biased Fox was, and how biased everyone was, basically. Um, I noticed everyone always had their agenda, like, and the agenda is important. Like, and the problem is your agenda changes over time, and something I think people forget is we live in a society with humans, barring all conspiracy theory. So everything that we participate in is run by humans, and you can't, you don't want to look at another human, despite how much income they make, or how intelligent they are, or how in control of whatever themselves. Just you can't say this human's different than that human. Essentially, at our core, we are all the same, and because of that, you always like what I like to do in situations, like in every situation in my life, basically. When I want to consider someone else, is I pretend I'm them the best I can. I consider the factors that I know of, and it gives me perspective. And a lot of it is, how would I feel if I were this person being told this thing, or in this position? Like, you could even consider Donald Trump. I think people intuitively know that he didn't run for president to win. I mean, I think that's wrong, honestly. Um, I think Donald Trump's a very smart person, and I think his gamble on the presidency, like his odds in his mind were less than 1% chance of winning, but he had a plan. I honestly believe his big plan was to win the presidency, but it was the unlikely outcome in his mind. So his plan would have worked out either way. Where if he had failed to win to get the nomination, he would have done something with his branding. Maybe I'm not going to claim I know exactly what he had in mind, but whatever it may be, the idea is that whatever he had in mind, it was a win-win for him. Running for president was a win-win, and when he and I believe this. I like people like to say that he wasn't planning on winning or he didn't think he was going to win, but he actually tried to win. Like people that watch the debates of Trump versus Hillary, Trump actively he didn't shy away. He didn't back down. He became more careful with his wordings at the right time. He attacked Hillary where it hurt her the most and where people were paying attention the most. His goal was to win the presidency. Like, whether people like to believe that or not, that was his end goal, was to win the presidency, and he won. So, when I think about it that way, yes, Donald Trump wanted to become president of the United States. Looking back on his history, everything he's done is to further his vision of something, which is for his own self gain, I guess you could say. So that's a lot to consider. Now, I want to take a look at the other side of the fence, the Democratic side. So before Donald Trump, so that was Donald Trump's path. He believed. I honestly think he believed that he could be the top 2 or top 3 contender in the Republican primaries. However, he ended up winning, so he just went for the presidency since he knew he could beat Hillary. That was the setup he was going for. He was actually rooting for that setup. So anyway, going to the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, to those that were paying attention at the time, bought out the DNC. Like literally, they were going bankrupt, and she basically bought them out. Like literally, and see, this came out during, I think it was a WikiLeaks email, and this was. See, WikiLeaks is very controversial for a lot of reasons. I shouldn't even say WikiLeaks. I'll cut this. So, this information was brought out during a certain set of emails that were released that were confirmed to be true, that Hillary Clinton had bought out the DNC. And it's interesting because a lot of things stem from this. It just requires a little bit of logic and a little bit of piecing things together. Like, who knew that Hillary had bought out the DNC? Did Bernie Sanders know? If Bernie Sanders knew, I really want people to consider this point. I don't think this is a point that's been considered enough. Did Bernie Sanders know that Hillary had bought out the DNC? If so, he knew going into the convention, his last chance to take the nomination from Hillary, that she had bought them out. And by this time, I believe the WikiLeaks emails had come out. And not only that, there was, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but a lot of things that happened, particularly to voters, newly registered voters that were pro-Sanders, at a lot of, quite a few places, weird things happened. And it happened so many times that there were so many different proofs over a long string of time, like a long period of time, aside from just the polling. I'm not even talking about polling. Polling is a whole other story. So at certain times, people would go to vote and their voter registration had changed from Democrat to Independent or to unregistered or to Republican. And people had confirmation, people, it got to the point where people had confirmed their most recent voter change and went the day of and had shown that it had changed magically the same day or hours before, or their change didn't go through, or something odd happened. This is the thing, like some people could argue that, okay, maybe it was a glitch in the system, but here's the problem, and here's the big hole in that argument. If there's a glitch in the system that's changing people's voter registration, it affected no other party, or at least no one else from any other party voting for anyone else other than Bernie Sanders came out and said this was happening to them. No one. This only affected those voters. And to make matters worse, a lot of the time, scouters inside I suppose the people that were controlling the voting booths would scout out the voters, because people would come in their hats and their pins and say Bernie 2016, you know. And what they would do, this was documented, videotaped in several locations, that during certain parts of the day, they would start handing out provisional votes. And those parts of the day would happen to be when Bernie supporters were in droves, basically, in these voting areas. And they would start handing out provisional votes without telling people that those votes will most likely not count. So a lot of people, and this was a word that was tossed around a lot of people felt disenfranchised, I suppose, which I suppose was used to describe people feeling that their vote was trying to be forced out, and that they were not a part of the decision-making process in the DNC. So this was a problem, and all of this stems back to a couple of things. See, this is already an event in history. In the end, what happened? Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, and he backed his full support to Hillary Clinton. Literally thousands of his fans. There was even a protest. There were protests made, and they reached big numbers. I think some of them hit over 100,000 signatures. Where people were screaming at Bernie, "Help us! Like we feel like we've been, we feel like our voice has been taken from us." People were begging Bernie to say something in place of the people that couldn't say anything. I want to make this point clear. What happened? See, if I were in Bernie's position, this is where I'm going with this. If I were in Bernie's position, what would I have done? If I had heard thousands of my supporters that had donated their hard-earned money to me, that if I were Bernie Sanders and I had all these supporters coming out and telling me all these wrongdoings that they had saw, my first question is, and I keep going back to this, but if I knew that there was no chance of me winning because Hillary had bought out the DNC and she was going to make sure that she won the nomination, why didn't I say anything? Why wouldn't I say anything is a better question. Why wouldn't I say anything? However, if I didn't know, and my fans were telling me all of this was happening, wouldn't I have wouldn't I be obligated to look into it further, to understand what's going on, to see why this is happening? Wouldn't I be obligated to my supporters to figure out what's going on and get to the root of this? So the argument that Bernie Sanders made was that electing Donald Trump is more important, or so the argument that Bernie Sanders made is not electing Donald Trump is more important than anything else, more important than his vision, more important than him becoming president, more important than corrupt Hillary. Do you see the hole in that argument? There's a bit, in my opinion, there's a very big hole in his argument. That's not what we wanted. We wanted our voices to be heard. That's all we wanted. Our voices to be heard. Does that make sense? And if I were in Bernie Sanders' shoes, what would I have done? I really ask myself this question because I think it's important to truly judge Bernie Sanders as a character, as a human. What's more important to Bernie Sanders? I just don't see it. I don't want to go further here because I think I've said enough. My argument is that Bernie Sanders was never a good candidate because he sounds good. I remember going to sleep to him, and sometimes I would be kind of late and I'd fall asleep listening to his rally, and he would make a lot of sense. He would point out all of the millionaires, all of the billionaires, and he would name them, and he would explain how they're going through all these loopholes and how it's become a big problem and how the gaps increased, and he makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, I'm a student in debt, so at some point I realized I kind of have a bias. I hear him say free college, and I understand that, and his argument is decent. It's not a bad argument, not at all by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually a good argument. I think college should be greatly reduced in price or free. I believe that for a lot of reasons, but in place of the buy-in system we have, it would have to be on a merit system. I think that's the trade-off, that we would have to live it on a merit system where the bar would have to be raised in order to get into college. You would have to take extra steps to further prove that you're going to make use out of the time in college and that you actually have a path going in. A lot of things would have to change because the buy-in system has failed greatly, and it's only left a lot of people rich, or very few people rich. It's only left very few people rich, and a lot of people in a lot of debt. So his vision it makes sense, but again, it comes down to his character. It comes down to who he is. If he obtained the presidency, would he actually make these things happen? Did he fight? Did he really fight for his position in the end? No. He used the argument that Donald Trump can't win. He bought into the narrative of the mainstream narrative. I think in the end, more than anything, he proved that he's one of them. He proved that he's one of everyone else, one of the establishment. But he's kind of like the undercover dog that is. And now they're trying to use him as the second choice candidate because their first choice is Elizabeth Warren and their second choice is Bernie Sanders. And Bernie is, again, I just, at this point, after 2016, I don't trust him. That's the truth. I do not trust Bernie Sanders after 2016. Anyway, just some thoughts. I have many more thoughts on all of this, but for now, those are my main thoughts that I just wanted to share because I think it's important to consider this in the argument with the mainstream media, with Bernie Sanders moving forward as candidates, because I think it's wrong